In this video, I want to show you 5 of my absolute favorite chord progressions that you should start using in your guitar playing. But first, we need to talk about the number system. So I'm sure plenty of you guys are familiar with the number system. That's why I decided it might be a good idea to have a little change of scenery, get outside and get away from the studio to explain this one. But if you have already heard it, you can skip to the timestamp up in the middle of the screen, and that'll get started right from the first chord progression. So every chord progression comes from a key, and every key comes from its corresponding major scale. So if we took something like the G major scale and played all of those notes, well, those are the notes that make up the key of G major. Now, each of the notes in the scale can be given a number, 1 through 7. This also tells us all 7 chords that are inside the key of G major. And whether they're major or minor actually comes down to a formula called the major-minor formula, which says that chords 1, 4, and 5 are going to be major chords, 2, 3, and 6 will be minor chords, and then the 7th chord will be a diminished chord. So in the case of G major, we're going to have G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished before returning back to that G major, the 1 chord. Now, something you're going to notice is that we like to use these Roman numerals instead of standard numbers when it comes to talking about chords. So when you see an uppercase Roman numeral, that's going to be a major chord, and when you see a lowercase Roman numeral, that's going to be a minor chord. So an example of this would be one of the most popular chord progressions ever, which we would call a 1, 5, 6, 4. And in the key of G major, that would sound like this. Okay, now that you know the basics, let's head back to the studio and check out the first chord progression. All right, so we're gonna kick things off with something that's pretty simple. This is essentially just a remix of the very popular 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. But in this case, we've got a 5, 6, 4, 1. And this chord progression, it's probably in a bunch of other songs, but where it really stood out to me and why I kind of fell in love with it is because of the song You Should Probably Leave by Chris Stapleton. This is the chord progression used in the chorus of that song. Now you can feel free to use any chord shapes you want with this because we're just using the basic major and minor chords for this progression, but I like to use just my standard bar chords. So in this case, we're using that D major there, that E minor right there on the 7th fret, going down here to the C major for the 4 chord, and then just going down to the full G major bar chord right there, and then the whole thing together. Now, what I think makes this chord progression particularly interesting is that it starts on the 5 chord, where typically chord progressions are going to start on the 4 or the 1 or the 6. They're going to be kind of more stable chords. That 5 chord feels like it wants to go somewhere right away. And I think this kind of opens you up to new ideas as far as singing melodies over it or playing melodies over it. And it just gives it a very cool character. Now there's a great YouTube video by David Bennett called Japan's Favorite Chord Progression, and this is the chord progression talked about in that video. Once again here, I'm just using basic major and minor bar chord shapes. So we've got our C major like this, our D major like this, then we go down to the B minor here before going up to the E minor right there. And one other cool thing is that these chords are actually the ones used for Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. very standard jazzy chord progression that's always gonna sound great, and it's a good opportunity to kind of go beyond the basic major and minor chords and start looking at 7 chords. So the shapes I used here are the A minor 7 for the 2 chord, and then we go to a D7 or a D dominant 7 for our 5 chord. And then we go down to a G major 7. I like to play it like this. If you don't want to use your thumb, you can make the shape look like that instead, if that's a little bit easier. And then our last one is to go up to the 6. So we get a minor 7 and E minor 7 up here. This one's nice and easy because you're just removing the pinky from that standard bar chord shape. Now, when it comes to 7 chords, they actually follow a formula just like the major minor formula that's going to tell you when you should use a dominant 7 chord or a major 7 or a minor 7 chord. And I actually have a little free ebook called The Guitarist Companion that not only covers every single major and minor chord in every single key, but it also goes over every single 7 chord in every single key as well. So if you would find that helpful, there'll be a link to download that at the top of the description. Now, this is probably my favorite lo-fi / neo-soul vamp. And it's really simple, right? Because we're only going from the 4 chord to the 1 chord, but we get to make use of our first 9 chord. And that's what makes this chord progression sound really cool. So the first chord is gonna look like this, and it's a little bit of a finger twister. It might take you some time to kind of get it down, but this is a C major 9 chord. And you're only playing the 4 notes that you're actually fretting here. You're not playing the high E or the low E strings. And if you can bar back here on this first finger to also catch that G string, then you can actually do kind of like a cool hammer on pull off thing with this pinky. It sounds very cool. And then for the second chord, for our 1 chord, we're just going to a G major 9. So it's actually the exact same shape. We just have to move our root note all the way up to this fret right here, the 10th fret. Just like that, we can do the same thing. Again, the shapes are exactly the same. This one is really great if you have a looper pedal as well and you want to work on your improvisation. Throw this chord progression on. It's very easy to improvise over. You can just use a G major pentatonic or an E minor pentatonic and it's going to sound really great. Now for this last chord progression, we've got a bit of a mix of different chord types here. And actually, all the chord progressions we played up until this point have been in the key of G major. This one is going to be in the key of C major. So a little change there. The first chord we're going to play, the 4 chord in this progression, is going to be an F major 7, but it's going to look like this. And this is essentially, if you know anything about the caged system, this is a C major caged shape, right? Rooted right here with that F note, but we release that one right there to make it an F major 7 like that. Then we move along to our 6th chord, which is gonna be an A minor 11 chord. That one's gonna look like this. This one could be a little tough to play because we don't want to play the high E, and we also don't play the A string there. So I like to use this finger to kind of lay on top of that A string to mute. And I typically use all my fingers to play this one, but you can strum through as well if you prefer to do that. Then for our final chord in the progression, we've got a C sus2 chord, and this one is just based on a regular C major bar chord. However, we are taking off what would typically be the pinky finger there in the shape. So now we have this. Turns it from a major chord into a sus2 chord, and then when we put all the chords together, we get I think it sounds pretty cool, and you can add some embellishments if you're ready on the C chord, right? As far as next steps, I'd recommend expanding your chord vocabulary and chord repertoire. I have a perfect lesson that'll help you do that. I'll put it up in the middle of the screen for you now if you want to check it out. Make sure you go grab that Guitarist Companion down in the description if you want every single chord in every single key. It is totally free. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.